Good afternoon, dear colleagues and guests. Today, the 17th of February, 2022, 11 o'clock Moscow time. The 17th of February, 2022, 11 o'clock Moscow time. We begin the meeting of the Dissertation Council on discussing the defense of Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna, Major 599 Media Communications and Journalism, on the topic Russia and Russians in the Media Discourse of the Modern Italy. I declare the meeting of the Dissertation Council open. I suppose that we need to discuss the technical issues. If there is a need, we'll announce a break. If there is no need to have a break, we'll continue in accordance with the procedure. By the order of the Scientific Secretary St. Petersburg State University, Ignatov Alexander Valentinovich, from the 10th of December 2021, number 119945/1, I, Melnik Galina Sergeyevna, Professor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of Digital Media Communications at Petersburg State University, was appointed the head of the Dissertation Council. The same order appointed the members of the Dissertation Council. Let me introduce them. Nikonov Sergey Borisovich, Doctor of Political Sciences, Associate Professor, Professor of the Department of International Journalism at Petersburg State University. Pantsirev Konstantin Arsenyevich, the Doctor of Political Sciences, Associate Professor, the Professor of the Department of the Theory and the History of Foreign Relations. In the remote access mode, the following members are taking place. Kaminskaya Tatiana Leonidovna, Doctor of Philological Sciences, Associate Professor, the Head of the Department of the Journalism of Novgorodsky State University. Can you see and hear us? Yes, everything is fine. The answer is yes. Aleynikov Sergey Viktorovich, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of Journalism of Prodnestrovsky State University, Moldova. Can you see and hear us? The answer is positive. Thank you. The applicant herself is also present with us, Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna. The scientific advisor is also present at the meeting. The scientific advisor is the Doctor of Sociological Sciences, Professor, the Head of the Department of Public Relationship, Gavr Dmitry Petrovich. In order to improve the quality of communication, please turn off your microphones and don't please forget to unmute when you are given the floor. I would also say that audio and visual recording is being carried out and there is live broadcasts on the St. Petersburg State University website. Also simultaneous interpreting is being carried out. On the website of St. Petersburg State University, the electronic email is published, and all those willing might send their questions to the email, thus take part in the scientific discussion. The questions will be referred to me, and I'll voice them during the discussion. The questions are to be related to the presentation of the applicant and the content of the thesis. It is necessary to indicate the full name, job position, and the place of work. The questions which are not related to the scientific discussion, to the text of the thesis, and anonymous questions will not be voiced. In accordance with the procedure for awarding the scientific degrees of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Sciences, in accordance with the order of St. Petersburg State University, the meeting of the Dissertation Council is considered valid if no more than 2/3 of the previously approved membership takes part in it, but no less than 4 people. Our Dissertation Council consists of 5 people. All 5 are present, including 2 members in the remote access access mode. Artificial contact is provided with every member, thus there is a quorum. I would like the officer of the curator of the defense to issue a turnout list. We announce the following procedure of the meeting. 1. Brief information by the chairperson about the applicant and the documents submitted. The compliance of the documents submitted by the applicant with the requirements. 2. Brief report by the applicant, about 15 minutes. 3. Questions to the applicant strictly about the presentation, no more than 2 minutes per question. 4. Responses by the applicant, no more than 5 minutes. 5. External reviews. 6. The reviews of all the members of the Dissertation Council with their appraisal of the thesis. 7. The speech by the chairperson, about 10 minutes. 8. The responses by the applicant to the reviews of the members of the Dissertation Council. 9. Open discussion. Those present at the defense might be able to take the floor. The questions should be related to the thesis or to the presentation by the applicant. Next, the chairperson announces the questions received via online broadcast of the meeting of the Dissertation Council. I'd like to pay attention to the fact that the written questions, which require more than 2 minutes to be voiced, will not be voiced. 11. The responses by the applicant, no more than 2 minutes per question. 12. The speech of the scientific advisor, no more than 3 minutes. 13. The discussion of the members by the members of the Dissertation Council before the open roll call of the results of the defense, during which the sound is muted, about 5 minutes. 14. Open roll call. Voice count by the chairperson of the Dissertation Council with the subsequent entry of the results in the minutes of the meeting. 15. Taken decision on awarding or non-awarding the scientific degree. And finally, 16. The final word of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, are there any questions or objections following the procedure? None? Since there are no objections, we will proceed with the procedure. So first of all, I'd like to ask you to mute your mobile phones. Dear colleagues in the remote access mode, please do not turn off your mobile phones so that we might be able to contact you in case of technical failure. So I'll begin the meeting. Brief report by the chairperson. The thesis by Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna, seeking the degree of the candidate of political sciences, major 599 media communication and journalism. The topic Russians in the media discourse of modern Italy was taken for defense according to the order from the 23rd of November 2021. Namiatova Kseniia wrote the thesis as a postgraduate student of St. Petersburg State University. Her scientific advisor is the Doctor of Sociological Sciences professor, the head of the Department of Public Relationship and Business, Gavra Dmitry Petrovich. The number of publications with the main provisions of the thesis are 4. In the publications reviewed by the Ministry of Science of the Russian Public Federation 2. In the Web of Science and Scopus reviewed publications are 2. all the documents provided by the applicant, according to the information that I received from the curator, comply to the regulations of Namiatova State University and can be found in the attestation file of the applicant. The copies of the document can be found with the officer of the work of the Station Council, who is present at the meeting. Prior to giving the floor to the applicant, I have a question to the members of the Dissertation Council. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, do you have any general questions to the applicant, including whether it's necessary to voice the entire list of the documents submitted for defense? Dear colleagues, in the remote access mode? No. Then we will give the floor to the applicant. You have 15 minutes for the brief report. Kseniia Andreevna, the floor is yours. Dear Chairperson, dear members of the Dissertation Council, dear guests, I'd like to present the thesis on the topic Russia and Russians in the media discourse of modern Italy. Talking about the relevance of the study, I'd like to say that the external image of the state is a significant asset, which determines how successful and fruitful the presence of a territorial entity in the international political arena is. In addition, we live in a difficult period of abundance and clash of information flows. And in these conditions, the image of the country is not only a marketing image, but is a kind of a guarantee of security. That's why it's so important to assess the image of the territorial entity on a regular basis. And if necessary, it's important to correct the defamation changes. Now, there are many automated systems for monitoring the media and analysis of social media mentions. But the conceptual approaches to the analysis of the image of the state do not provide for the use of technological solutions for the study of a huge amount of data. The existing methods are based on sociological approaches of collection and processing of empirical data. Surveys are carried out, questionnaires, and in-depth interviews. With regard to the modern communicative environment, these are largely outdated approaches. At present, in the age of information society and the dominance of online media, the issue of assessing the image of the state in the communicative environment seems to be essential. It requires modern software solutions. Without them, taking into account the huge volumes of information, it's difficult to analyze the media image of territorial subjects. It's necessary to focus that within the last decade we've been experiencing a new geopolitical confrontation between the generalized West and the Russian world. It's generally accepted that the starting point was 2014 and reunification of Crimea with the Russian Federation. Since then, any foreign policy of the Russian Federation is under close survey of the West, and it's instantly reflected in the European media discourse. We encounter direct or veiled accusations of aggression, expansionism, violation of democratic freedoms, and interfering in directions of the Russian Federation. And these are the key aspects that determine the relevance of the study. The theoretical basis of the thesis is reflected in the following slide. The objects of the study were the publications in the media on Facebook Italy about Russia in the period from the beginning of 2012 till the end of 2018. This is mentioned in this slide. The purpose of the study is to identify the main characteristics and reconstruct the image of Russian citizens in the media discourse of modern Italy in the context of information confrontation with the West. The task set to achieve the above-mentioned goal can be seen in the slide. In accordance with the task, the structure of this study was determined. The work consists of introduction, 3 chapters, and conclusions. And now I'd like to proceed with the summary. The first part, which is predominantly theoretical, deals with the conceptual and substantive issue of a personalization of the media system category. As part of the station research, the author starts from the concept of media system, since this approach allows to select the most relevant media for collecting media texts with their subsequent analysis. Media discourse means the discourse which, in relation to our task, is represented in media text belonging to the national media system. Based on this interpretation, the author characterizes the current state of the Italian media system. When analyzing media system, it's necessary to pay attention to the three-level understanding. At the macro level, media system is understood as a set of media actors with similar functions, playing according to common rules within the scope of the rules. At the meso level, the interrelation of its element or mediators within the geographic area are analyzed. And at the micro level, there is a focus on specific elements, for example, new media, or in procedural changes such as hybridization or digitalization of media system, multi-platform media, etc. Such an approach to the issue makes it possible to group the accumulated research material and systematize it in along three different trajectories. In the third paragraph, the thesis seeks to determine the structural parameters of the Italian media system and give its main characteristics. It emphasizes that Italian media system is in the process of hybridization and convergence with the means of internet communication. Thereby, we can see the trends of media to go beyond its interesting boundaries. Television, radio, and the press are increasingly becoming multi-platform. Authors' materials are available to the target audience in any format, thus blurring the boundaries between television and radio broadcasts and print press. The Italian public has access to everything via the internet. In order to assess the image of the state in the foreign media discourse, this is a very positive aspect, since the researcher has the maximum amount of empirical data through access to the global network. The second specific feature of the Italian media system is the preservation of media parallelism, which hypothetically leads to the formation of a personal habit of Italian journalists to take into account pan-European sentiments and party interests with preparing materials in the Russian Federation. But also there are trends towards the decrease of the level of media parallelism, which peaked in the second half of the 90s and 2000s and associated with Berlusconi's personality. The second chapter of the thesis analyzes two issues which seem not to be related. This is the image of territorial subjects in information confrontations. The applicant combines these two trajectories into a single chapter, since the author bases on the fact that the modern concept of the image of territorial entities in the international arena can be fully separated from the theory of confrontations of international actors. We live in an era of information confrontation, so the formation and evaluation of the image of Russians could be considered taking into account the conditions of the image being formed. The first chapter analyzes the theoretical approach. The author considers theoretical approaches and methods of determining the structure of the external image of the state. The main points of the second chapter include the following. 1. Media image as a type of image is the most important element in the information confrontation of the parties on the world stage. It's the media that serve as the main virtual space for confrontational actions, and this is here that a certain image of the state is constructed. It's necessary to take into account the fact that the daily amount of information is huge, and thus it's necessary to develop new media and new approaches for the analysis of media text as the main semantic units of the media image. 2. Of all the approaches to assessing the image of territorial entity in the international arena, the spheral substantial model is the most relevant, since it helps to form an empirical research base and use text analysis and reconstruct the image in the form of a visual model. 3. Comparison of different approaches to interpretation of such a phenomenon as information struggle allows us to offer certain definition. Information is a form of struggle is the information space using special methods, techniques, and means of characteristics which provide active achievement of specific goals. The toolkit of information confirmation consists of psychological techniques, methods of influencing the masses, elements of propaganda, and manipulative strategies. In the third chapter, we can see the reflection of the results of the empirical study according to the method proposed by the author. The foundation of the final chapter is the results reflected in the first two parts of the thesis. The third chapter consists of three parts. The first chapter gives information about the methodology of the research. The second chapter describes the results of testing on a short-term case, media reflection of the Russian humanitarian mission in Italy during the COVID-19 pandemic in Bergamo. And the third part of the chapter reflects the results of an empirical study and analyzes the image of Russia in the modern media discourse of Italy. After analyzing the work in the field of media discourse analysis, we can see that the current methods cannot allow the processing of thousands of publications. At the same time, it's not enough to analyze even 100 publications to create a representational sampling. Therefore, the use of purely journalistic methods significantly limits specialists, and it's necessary to use new approaches and methods with the use of modern IT technologies. The proposed author's methodology is based on the approaches used in commercial structures to assess the image of an enterprise, a personal brand. The difference of these methodology is that in addition to the formation of a word cloud for collecting information and monitoring system, the author proposes to use several types of encoding for the analysis of empirical data, allowing the researcher to conduct media research over a long period of time, namely over 7 years. Let's have a closer look at methodology. The characteristics of the media system made it possible to select the media for collecting empirical data. Over the entire period of the study, more than 184,000 publications were collected and processed. You can see the list of the sources in the slide. At the second stage, key expressions were identified and semantic core of the study was formed, according to which empirical material was selected for further analysis. When developing the semantic core, we proceeded from the logic of the spheral substantial model of the image of the territorial association of governed Dmitry Petrovich, and also from the concept of Samuel Anhalt. The principle of building a territory brand are taken into account when forming the subcategories of the semantic core. In addition, we added the subcategory of sanctions and incidents because of the political information agenda of recent years. You can see the semantic core in this slide. An important stage of methodology is the determination of international indicators. The basis of encoding the tone was specially designed matrix, which is in front of you. At the final stage, a list of stop words was formed. It includes construct-forming verbs, prepositions, articles, and the name of media. In response to one of the remarks of the Distinguished Council members, Sergei Borisnikanov, we'd like to note that stop words did not limit the collection of empirical data. The list was applied already at the stage of data processing. Stop words was excluded from the word clouds for each of the 14 semi-annual periods. These were the periods in accordance to which the main information agenda was reconstructed. As a result of the study, the main trends were identified. The dynamics of publication devoted to Russia has increased throughout 7 years. On the screen you can see two peaks. The first is related to the situation around the Crimea and Winter Sochi Olympics. And the second surge of interest is associated with geopolitical confrontation around North Korea and Syria and interest in the World Cup 18. Within 7 years, the negative agenda regarding Russia prevailed over the positive one. However, I would like to draw attention to the fact that if we talk about figures, the rhetoric dedicated to Russia was mostly neutral. As a result, the analysis of internationally colored publications, it was revealed the most frequent negative words were conquista, capture, threat, danger, occupation. Among the words that are positive in terms of the frequency, the most used words is friends. but sometimes it might be negative, like in the headline, Putin's friends are the country's most corrupt official. In addition to friends, the positive rhetoric includes the words help, union, partner, protect, and friendship. Thus, we can see the polarity of the assessment of Russia and Russians in the Italian media discourse. The visualization of the image of Russia with the help of this spheral substantial model of the image of the state made it possible to determine that the media discourse is dominated by the information agenda dedicated to social issues. It's necessary to note that when developing the semantic core, the attitude of the government towards the environment, discrimination, and fight against poverty were considered to be the social component. The subcategories government, pollution, and poverty reductions have been assigned to the political component. Figure 5. Thus, the social component decreased from 43% to 29%, while the political component increased to 39%. The scientific novelty of the thesis is the following. For the first time, empirical analysis of the image of Russia in Italian media and social networks was carried out over a 7-year period, using the author's specialized method for analyzing the image of the territorial subject. The author's methodology for assessing the image of the state in foreign media discourse has been developed and is applicable for a wide range of research tasks. The methodology is based on the use of interdisciplinary approach and includes the use of modern digital solutions at the stage of data collection and primary processing. For the first time, based on the empirical analysis of meta text and social media text, a detailed structural description of the representation of the Russian Federation media discourse of Italy during the period of increasing confrontation with the West is provided. The conceptual approach to the general theory of foreign policy image making in the context of information confrontation are specified. You can see the applicability in the slide. The results of appropriation of the thesis and the scientific novelty can be found on in the following slide. The thesis itself and the research was supported by the Russian Foundation for Basic Research. Thank you for your attention. I'm ready to answer your questions. Are there any questions from the members of the Dissertation Council? Based on the presentation, I have a small question. You mentioned the methodology of Gavra or Universitetskaya methodology. As far as I know, this is the methodology used by 2 scientists. I'm talking about the structural model of the Gavra Dmitry Petrovich model 2010-2011. Thank you. Are there any more questions? If there are no more questions, we move to the second part of our meeting, to the reviews of the members of the Dissertation Council. I'll give the floor to Nikonov Sergei Borisovich first, then Pansarev Konstantin Vasylyevich, then to Kaminska Tatiana Leonidovna, then Aleynikov Sergei Petrovich, and my review will be the final one. I would like to remind you that the applicant might provide responses after each singular review or after all the reviews are voiced. I would offer you to answer the reviews one by one. I'd like to provide a general response following all the reviews. Yes, since we know the reviews, we've seen them on the website, we can have a look at the responses in general. Since all the reviews were published on the university website, would ask dear members of the council to voice only the key points remarks or questions to the applicant? Are there any objections? No. If none, I would like to proceed with the reviews. Sergei Borissovich, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Good afternoon. Kseniia Andreevna, thank you very much for your report that you voiced. And you have already started answering the remarks that could be found in my review. But since we are broadcast live, I would like all the colleagues to understand my remarks and the general assessment. I will voice some of the remarks which might trigger discussion or might not trigger discussion, for example. As for me, I have 3 criteria the applicant might take the seat. It's not necessary to remain standing all the time. So I have several criteria when assessing the thesis. The first criteria is the basis of the thesis. So we need to answer several questions. If there is a problem, whether the thesis is relevant, was the researcher working independently, and was the scientific methodology used? The author describes the conclusions on page 58, describing the methodology, the analysis of the information, and the structure of the results. Having looked through the thesis, I'd like to say that the first criteria is met. The second criteria, in my opinion, is justification of the provisions for the defense. And in here, I would like to hear clarification on certain issues. I would like to remind you that Mancini and Bodronova, our colleague, and other researchers that the author mentioned, agree that the media system is a concept. And Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna used this word concept on page 18 as well. Nevertheless, the thesis has the word conception or approach, not the concept. The researchers proceed from the idea that this approach does not require the definition. In here you use the word approach, not the word concept. Thus, I'd like to get clarification on the point. Is it the idea of the concept, or it is the approach, what you actually mean? In the third paragraph of the first chapter, the argument is the following. In accordance with the concept approach of Halin and Mancini, the media system of Italy belongs to the Mediterranean pluralistic model. As for the conclusions of the first chapter, I don't quite understand the thesis. The formation of the personal habit of an Italian journalist to take into account European views and party interests when working on materials dedicated to the Russian Federation. And then you say, within the framework of the thesis, we don't talk about the issue of implementing specific journalistic practices, since such trends might deform the image of Russia. The second chapter. The second chapter is dedicated to the image everything is clear and justified. The conclusion to chapter 4 is the following. There is a profound idea in the scientific community that Russia and the West are in confrontation. And the starting point is the annexation of the Crimea. But some scientists say that confrontation began earlier. In 2014, one of the Italian researchers pointed at the trend of the Anglo-Saxon West to depict Russia in the negative light. Maybe this information confrontation is the legacy of the Cold War. Russia sometimes makes a number of strategic mistakes and has a rather proactive militaristic role. Thus, counterparts might form the image of our country as an aggressor. And the reference to one of the Italian researchers, without giving the name, this is a quote which is 12 years old. And if we talk about science as Western or Eastern, means that the science become influenced by politics. Thus, the phenomenon is different from the nomen. But I'd like to hear the arguments of justification that the scientific community has this idea, fixed idea. You also didn't mention what strategic mistakes Russia made and what the applicant means by a militaristic position of the country. The third chapter analyzes the image of Russia and Russians in the media discourse of modern Italy. We agree that it's possible to use these methods together. Qualitative and quantitative methods are compatible. One can be used to visualize or provide clarifications to the data. And the researchers that you mention, Campbell, Danzin, Namiatova, talk about triangulation. But if we talk about the spherical structural model proposed by Gavra and Savitskaya, maybe Dmitry Petrovich changed the methodology a little bit. This is why in my review I included both Gavra and Savitskaya. The following question arises. What audience is influenced by the image of Russia, and whether this image has a certain influence on the Italian audience? And you don't talk about the number of Italians surveyed. And the main reference is Appendix 3. You have all provided answer to that because you excluded the verbs. The fourth chapter provides the results of the research that was conducted within the framework of the grant, Russia and Russians. In addition to the work done, it would have been better to provide their report on the completion of the grant, but not its description. But it's just one of my remarks because I found the information about this project on the internet. And it's necessary for me to hear your opinion on these criteria. The third criteria is whether this work arises scientific discussion or whether the applicant has the perspective of concluding the work, continuing the work in the sphere. And we agree that it's possible to continue research in the sphere. As for conclusions, conclusion 1 is accepted. Conclusion 2 is accepted, excluding the phrase that this fact is negatively related to the image of the Russian Federation within the geopolitical information confrontation. Conclusion 3 is accepted. Conclusion 4 is accepted as a hypothesis, since this model is discursive. Conclusion 5 accepted. It has the author's approach to the definition. Conclusion 6 is not accepted, neither as hypothesis, neither as hypothesis. Conclusion 7 is not accepted in accordance with the text of the thesis, but might be viewed as the starting point of scientific discussions. One of the criteria requires specification, but formally it is accepted. Thus, the thesis by Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna on the topic Russia and Russians in Media Discourse of Modern Italy corresponds to the main requirements of the Order 1911-2021, number 11181/1, on the Order for awarding scientific degrees in Petersburg State University. And I believe that Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna deserves being awarded the scientific degree of Political Sciences, Major 599, Media Communications and Journalism. Points 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order were not violated. Sergei Borisovich, thank you very much. We will hear the response following all the other reviews. We'd like to give the floor to Panterev Konstantin Sergeyevich. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to say that the work is relevant and novel. We see that there is a new stage of geopolitical confrontation between Russia and the West, and any foreign activity of Russia is closely scrutinized by the West and is reflected in the European media discourse. Since the review can be found on the website, I will focus primarily on the remarks, since any scientific research paper still has some flaws.
С моей точки зрения, требует дополнительного уточнения.
It's necessary to specify the chronological framework of the research. Page 7, the author says that the object of the research are publications in mass media and Facebook of Italy and concerning Russia, starting from 2012 till 2018. But it's not understandable why the author in the second part of the third chapter analyzes the work of the Russian humanitarian mission work in Italy in 2020. Maybe it would have been better to prolong the framework or till 2020. Page 12. The author writes that the assessment and processing of the empirical data is conducted with the use of intellectual data analysis, using classificators and methods and technologies of processing big data. Ontological knowledge, methods of processing controversial and not clear knowledge, and methods of context identification classification. What does the author mean by saying clear knowledge? It seems to me that the author used the idea of unclear knowledge as the synonym of a controversial knowledge. The third remark. The author should have specified the empirical base of the research in the introduction. Since the wording federal and regional Italian media looks too abstract, it would have been better to talk about the specific Italian media which were analyzed in the empirical part of the research. The fourth remark. The second provision for defense is questionable. Page 14, the author says, the media system of Italy is at the stage of hybridization and convergence with the internet communication. But this thesis is not a novel. Convergence in the media sphere was discussed by Yelena Vartanova. 5. Certain remarks concerning the structure of the work. The name of the first chapter of the thesis does not have the best name possible. Its name is Media System of Italy at the Modern Stage. This chapter in reality is dedicated to the analysis of theoretical aspects of the concept of media system. Thus, I would offer to make the first chapter theoretical one and analyze the media system of Italy in a separate chapter. And my final remark is the following. How many scientific publications were published on the research? On page 16, the author says that 4 works were published. 4 are in the publications reviewed by the Ministry of Education, 2 publications reviewed in Scopus and Web of Science, and 3 in publications which form a part of RINS. Thus, it means that the author published not 4 but 9 articles. So could you please clarify this point? Nevertheless, the thesis is novel, has applicable value, and the thesis is of high quality. The conclusions are well grounded. The thesis by Namiatova, Kseniia, and Andreevna on the topic Russia and Russians in Media Discourse of Modern Italy corresponds to the main requirements of the Order 11181/1 on awarding the scientific degrees submitted by State University. And applicant Namiatova, Kseniia, and Andreevna deserves being awarded the scientific degree of Candidate of Political Sciences, Major 599, Media Communication and Journalism. Points 9 and 11, clauses 9 and 11 were not violated. Now we'd like to give the floor to Tatiana Leonidovna Kaminskaya. Can you see and hear us? Well, I will follow the example of my colleagues, and we'll skip the first part of my review, which talks about the content of the thesis, and move towards the remarks. But nevertheless, I'd like to say that the thesis is very important scientific work, and the scientific background of the author is rather important. Nevertheless, there are certain remarks in the presentational part of the scientific work. As for the names of the chapters, Konstantin Arsenovich mentioned that the name of the first chapter should reflect its theoretical quality. Media system is viewed through the lens of the theory of mass communication. Unfortunately, we see only the paper, not your face. The name of the third chapter, apart from the word analysis, which is not very often used in the headings of the chapters, is almost the same as the name of the thesis itself, because the part should not be similar to the name of the large entity. There are some typos and misprints. Numbers are omitted, and in the conclusions, the chapter is called a paragraph, page 50. As for the content, as for the core of the research, the thesis doesn't talk about the difference between the image of Russia constructed in the media of different political approaches, and the aspect of analyzing the image on behalf of different media actors who have different values and political views is important, since the applicant talks about political parallelism of the media system of Italy. Probably the newspaper La Repubblica, which is leftist, as well as the Corriere della Sera, which is a centrist newspaper, has a very similar approach towards Russia. Thus, it should have been mentioned, because the political viewpoint of Italian mass media and the representation of Russia by them is not mentioned, and it's necessary to know whether there is such a link. Nevertheless, the goal of the research was met, and the thesis by Kseniia Namiatova on topic Russia and Russians in the mid-discourse of modern Italy corresponds to the main requirements on awarding scientific degree in Petersburg State University. And applicant Kseniia Namiatova has been awarded the scientific degree of candidate of political sciences, major 599. Clauses 9 and 11 were not violated by the applicant. Thank you very much, Tatiana Leonidovna. Now I'd like to give the floor to Sergei Viktorovich. I will follow the strategy that our colleagues used. And you can read the information about the relevance of the study and the structure of it that can be seen in the published review. So the first remark is that media serves as a virtual area of confrontational activity, and they construct a certain image of the state. This is the conclusion which can be found on page 79. Most likely, media might serve as an instrument of a confrontation, but not as the area or environment of this confrontation. Mass media forms information environment, but since it's limited by the audience, it's impossible to talk about its universal traits. Another controversial issue is the mentioning of the frequent negative words such as a threat, threats, although using them together does not change the results of the content analysis. Also, we would like to know what is the role and the opportunity of promoting the positive image of Russia by a Russian diaspora in Italy. Probably the official resource, which has existed for 13 years, Russians in Italy, does not fully implement its capacity of influencing the image, might serve as a way to catalyze intergovernmental relationship and improve the relationship between the countries. And the above-mentioned remarks might trigger further discussion And I would like to agree with the colleagues saying that the thesis by Namiatova Kseniia, Andreevna, on the topic Russia and Russians in the modern discourse of Italy corresponds to the main requirements of the order from 1911-2021 on the order of awarding scientific degrees, and applicant Namiatova Kseniia deserves being awarded the scientific degree of candidate of political sciences, major 599, media communication and journalism. Clauses 9 and 11 of the procedure were not violated. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sergei Viktorovich. Now I'd like to proceed with my review. Well, I would like to say a couple of words about the relevance of the work. The author has a very right methodological approach to the image as a very important way to support the image of the country, taking into account the confrontational type of relationship. Large number of empirical data was used into scientific research, and an author's own methodology was used. All the stages of describing and collecting material were mentioned. The format of the use of the scientific information was provided, and all the necessary software products, including the Python language, which serves the basis to believe that this research paper is of practical importance and can be used for branding and image making. Methodological base is well proven and is representative. Secondary sociological data, media sets and media logics and audio press are used. And there are interesting reports and recent research results are also published, including some Reuters reports. I'm not going to provide the characteristics of each particular chapter. The appendixes are rather important, and they amount to 67 pages. They provide information about the methodology and the process of analyzing the information, and all the data that can be found in the appendices shows the ground of the research, and that the goals and aims were attained. Nevertheless, there are certain remarks and clarifications, and probably there are some recommendations even.
Здесь много замечаний касается каких-то стилистических неточностей, вызывающих.
Although I mentioned several points, there are certain stylistical. On page 7, the author says that the object is the perception of Russian Federation in the information environment of Italy, which is ontologically implemented through the corpus of media text, with mention of Russia and Russian subject in Italian media, Facebook. And it is not very clear, so it seems that Russia represents itself. On page 79, is it a form of confrontation with the aim of achieving specific goals? Which active role is implemented? Whose active role? In the introduction, you didn't have the paragraph about the methods. When you talk about the period of the research, as my colleagues have already mentioned, the chronology encompasses 2012 and 2019, whether you start with 2014. One of the conclusions of Chapter 1 is not absolutely clear. The author says that within the framework of the thesis, the issues of the implementation of specific journalistic practices, but such trends might lead to defamation of the image of the Russian Federation in the Italian media discourse. So does it mean that the author doesn't want to consider the certain practices of the journalists, but believes that this practice leads to the distortion of the media image of Russia? So it should have been reformulated. On page 7, there is the goal, which I don't clearly understand. I suppose that you meant software and not developing computer, but developing software, I suppose. Also, intonation, coloring is not clear. On page 53, you mention Pavel Afanasovich Tsigankova. You wrote it incorrectly with E without the name and survey. So whether it is Tsiganova V or Tsigankova P, the methodological base should also have been clarified. You could have included Labouche and Nikonov Kalugina. No politics and internet media might be of service for you. These are my recommendations mostly. And I'd like to agree with all my colleagues that my remarks are not critical and they do not influence the overall positive view of the thesis. The thesis by Namiatova Kseniia, Russia and Russians in the Mid-Discourse of Modern Italy, corresponds to the main requirements established by the order from the 19th 11/2021, and applicant Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna deserves being awarded the scientific degree of candidate of political sciences. Major 599, clauses 9 and 11 were not violated. I suppose we can proceed with the responses. So, Kseniia, please, the floor is yours once again. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the distinguished members of the Decision Council for the in-depth analysis of my work. And I would like to say the following. On the whole, we do agree with the first remark by respected Galina Sergeyevna about the formulation of the subject of the study. If we talk about the ontological realization of phenomenon through a set of media texts, then it means that the subject is the media in which the texts are published. But with the second remark of the distinguished chairperson about the subject in relation to the category information confrontation, we agree in full. In this definition, it's permissible to speak of social subjects at any level of social hierarchy, from individuals to social organizations and territorial state formations. The first remark of Professor Olejnikov also refers to the problem of information confrontation. We cannot fully agree with the reviewer's remark, since understanding media as a tool in the hands of political elites does not contradict the interpretation of the media precisely as the instrument, as a space in which information confrontation unfolds. It is the media space that serves as a source of positive and negative attitudes of the mass audience towards the objects that are not the subject of direct empirical experience. This has been proven by the classical works of Laswell School, Moscovici, and modern studies of media effects. And the classic monograph by the chairman of the Decision Council, Professor Galina Sergeyevna Melnik, about the psychological effects of mass media also deals with this idea. As for the question of Galina Sergeyevna about the methods, we do agree. We should have included this section in the introduction. The thesis focuses both on general scientific methods among which we distinguish analysis and synthesis, description and classification, as well as more specific ones, including content in intent analysis, mentioned on page 85. When developing the methodology, an integrated approach was used, that is, quantitative and qualitative methods of the analysis were used simultaneously. Also, to assess the image of Russia in the Italian media, the case study method was used, and the media image of Russia was reconstructed during the humanitarian mission from Russia with Love in Bergamo. Responding to the second remark of the respected Professor Kseniia, first of all, I would like to say that we fully and completely agree with the respected Tatiana Leonidovna that the political viewpoint of the publication and the values of the owners and editors influence the coverage of events that have the content of political and value aspect. However, the study showed that the media belonging to one or another spectrum of political viewpoint of Italy does not have a decisive influence on the nature of display of Russia as a whole. We note that there is a decrease in the level of media parallelism, which peaked in the second half of the 90s, primarily associated with personality of Berlusconi. ETNS annually measures the level of press freedom throughout European space, and it doesn't record a high level of media parallelism. Changes in legal regulation also played a certain role. Equally, per Condicio law, which implies the division of airtime in equal proportions between competing parties and candidates, serves an example of legal regulation. Members of the Station Council, Professor Galina Sergeyevna Melnik, Konstantin Alexeyevich Pantsev, and Sergei Borisovich Nikonov, in their reviews raised questions about the boundaries of the time period for the empirical analysis of the text. We have combined those questions and would like to respond the following. The start of data collections in 2012 was justified by the fact that we sought not only to determine international changes after the Crimean events, but also to demonstrate the growing attention to the Russian agenda. Events in Ukraine unfolded at the end of the 2013, and if we took 2014 as a starting point, we wouldn't see many changes. In other words, it was important to see and to evaluate the reflection of Russian agenda not only before and after, but also in dynamics during the development of. At the same time, we didn't include 2019-2020, the main block of studies, since the collection and processing of data began in 2019. But willing to analyze the later trends, we decided to process the information in 2020 when Russia was providing humanitarian assistance in 2020. The recommendation by Konstantin Kseniia to include the year 2020 and expand our research base will be taken into account. According to Professor Pantsev, I'd like to clarify that there were 18 media that formed the empirical base of our study. To name just a few, some of them are Corriere della Sera, Corriere del Sport, La Gazzetta dello Sport, Il Gazzettino, and so on and so forth. All the publications could be seen on the 10th slide. The choice was made based on thorough analysis of the Italian media system. In addition to the media, the collection of empirical data was carried out from 18 Facebook pages. According to the fourth remark of the respected Konstantin Alexeyevich, we on the whole agree with the review remark, but I'd like to note that our defense provisions refer directly to the media system in Italy and not to the process of hybridization of media systems in general. This is rather an empirically fixed fact based on the results of scientific study. Of course, we all relied on the words of Elena Leonidovna Vartanova. A number of remarks by the respected Professor Sergei Borisovich Nikonov deserve a separate comment. We have combined the comments into one block and will try to answer them within the framework of a single logic. First of all, on pages 72, 73, 74 of paragraph 2.3, the thesis fixes the fact that no longer requires additional argumentation that information war is being waged against Russia, which of course did not start in 2014, but reproduces a long-term tradition dating back to the British establishment to the Crimean War. such theorists as Sergei Markov, Susan Loftus, Roger Kannert, Vasilenko, Bubnova, and Vargina, who represent Moscow State University and MGIMO University, the Institute of World Economy, International Relations, and Russian Academy of Scientists, the USA and Canada RAS, and we refer to them on pages 72, 73, 74, 77. When on pages 73, 77 we write that Russia's strategic mistakes dominate Western policy, in here we base our opinion on the information based by the Federation Council Commission on Predation State Sovereignty under the leadership of then Andrei Klimov. And strategic communication of red comparisons were also provided. The author of the thesis does not agree with the thesis that Russia made strategic mistakes. It's not the author of the thesis, but Western theorists, journalists, and propagandists accuse Russia of military exposition. And now in January, February 2022, all the media bacchanale around the alleged invasion of Ukraine confirms our thesis. The author of the thesis can only regretfully fix the aggressive Western position. On the other hand, we certainly agree with Professor Nikonov's idea that there is not and should not be a division into Western and Eastern science. As for the sixth remark, I'd like to say that we, with the scientific advisor, believe that the work on large empirical material, it can be shown that the representation of Russia in the Italian media discourse is deformed and structurally is irrelevant to the basic model of the image of the territorial subject proposed by the spheral substantial model. In the media discourse, the information on economy, social sphere, culture, tourism potential, and Russian is underrepresented. Russians with their interests, values, and problems are practically not represented on the pages of Italian press or on TV and radio. We agree with the remarks of the respected Galina Sergeyevna and Sergei Borisovich, considering the idea that the thesis of the analysis of journalists' practices is not formulated correctly. What we meant is that we did not analyze in much detail each text out of 200,000 selected ones, but we conducted the statistical analysis of the entire array of selected text. Thus, quantitative and qualitative methods were used simultaneously, and general patterns were observed. Regarding Sergei Borisovich's remark regarding stop words, we provided information in the report. As for the fourth question by Sergei Viktorovich Aleynikov,
алгоритмов поиска. Они регистрозависимы и требуют ввод точного.
Modern search algorithms are case sensitive and require to enter an exact match of the word. In other words, if we ask the system to collect the publications of the word in plural, threats, then they collect them. But if we search for a singular form of a noun, then we will get all the information relevant to this particular request. As for the word concept, instead of the word approach, we do fully agree with Professor Nikonov. As for a rhetorical question of the respected Sergei Borisovich, I'd like to say that the question of the influence of the image on the recipients was not among the operational objectives of the study. It is rather the subject of psychological sciences, but we might focus on it in the future. We're very grateful to Professor Aleynikov for the idea of appealing to the positive communication potential of the Russian diaspora in Italy. In response to Professor Pansarev, I would like to say that 9 publications were published, among them 2 publications in Scopus and Website databases, and the same publications were also published in the publications of the Russian Academy of Science. In addition, 2 more publications were published in the Russian Academy of Science reviewed publications. Referring to the remarks of the respected Tatiana Leonidovna and Konstantina Arsenyevich regarding the structure of the work, we will take all the remarks into account. And as for Tsigankov, we emailed Pavel Afanasьevich Tsigankov, professor of the Faculty of Political Sciences at Moscow State University. Once again, I'd like to thank all the members of the Dissertation Council. Now I'd like to address to each member of the Dissertation Council in particular. Sergei Borisovich, are you satisfied with the response? Yes, I am. Konstantin Arseniyevich, are you satisfied with the response? Well, I didn't hear your response about the unclear knowledge. Yes, I agree with you absolutely. What we meant was the controversial idea. Since I deal with unclear logic, that's why it was a very interesting issue for me. Tatiana Leonidovna, are you satisfied? Sergei Leonidovich? Yes, me too. Following the procedure, we might give the floor to those who are willing to have the floor, but first we give the floor to the scientific advisor.
Включу микрофон, уважаемые коллеги.
Dear colleagues, I'm restricted to 3 minutes only, so I'll try to be very brief. In accordance to the procedure, we need to talk about the personality of the applicant and not about the thesis itself, since she defends her own thesis. First of all, I would like to talk about the personality. This is a researcher, and she's the head of the communication agency, which she started heading starting from 2009. That's agency Glorious Story, which is among one of the very important communicative agencies of Russia. So the applicant is not only a researcher, but is a person who can practically use her knowledge in public relationship and practical projects. Academically, Kseniia Andreevna worked with 2 grants. She has the stipend of the government of the Russian Federation. She won several grants from the Russian Federation and 1 grant from St. Petersburg. And the number of publications is substantial. While being a postgraduate student, she was teaching courses within the High School of Journalism and Communications, and the reviews of students and master students are very flattering. And finally, it is a very responsible person, which is a very positive characteristic of the applicant. I'm not going to mention anything about the thesis, and I think that much was already said about it. If there is anybody willing from the audience to have the floor, you're welcome. No. Dear colleagues, do the members of the Dissertation Council wish to have the floor once again? Dear colleagues, thank you for this opportunity. I would like to say that I'm not going to speak about the thesis, but since you are applying for the candidate of political sciences, you spoke about reunification of the Crimea. Was there reunification of the Crimea? Was there a law on creating the subject of the Russian Federation? That is pure politics. And in the text of your thesis, there is this word of reunification. But is that journalism or is it politics? We should be very careful. Because it has to be substantiated by the state documents. Crimea became an independent state. We decided to become an independently become the part of the Russian Federation, and a new subject of the Russian Federation was introduced. So it is, so to say, not reunification in its pure sense. So journalism and scientific approach might be a little bit different. Since I'm a legal professional, maybe when we hear the defense of the candidate of legal sciences, we will get a more detailed term, but since we're talking about journalism, I suppose that this term can be applicable as well. Are there any other members of the Decision Council who would like to take part in the scientific discussion? I'm addressing each member of the Decision Council in particular. None. Prior to voting procedure, I need to say that we did not receive any questions over the internet. So we will have to move into the voting procedure. But before that, I need to ask you whether the members of the Decision Council and the applicant have any questions or objections to the procedure of the meeting, including the remote access mode. And each member has to voice their opinion separately. No objections. No objections. No objections. Is it necessary to announce the break to discuss the results of the defense with muted sound of the broadcast? We might announce a technical break, or there is no need for such technical break. I suppose there is no necessity of having a technical break. Since there is no need, we do not accept any more questions. And we move to the procedure, to the voting procedure. Please make sure that you hear and see everybody well. And I put the question of awarding Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna the scientific a degree of the candidate of media scientist and journalism. Point clause 23 was not violated, and clause 11 is the following: the applicant has to refer to the author and the source of the material or results when using the results of scientific research conducted by the applicant himself or herself, or as a co-author. The applicant must announce that explicitly. I'd like to remind you that the decision is considered taken if no more than 3 members of the Decision Council, half of the members, vote for it. So please express your opinions. Sergei Borisovich Nikonov. I vote for. Point 911 were not violated. Konstantin Arsenyevich. I vote for. Kaminskaya Tatiana Leonidovna. I vote for. Sergei Viktorovich Aleynikov. I agree with the colleagues. Vote for. And I, the chairperson, Melnik Galina Sergeyevna, agree with my colleagues, and I vote for. Awarding the scientific degree to Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna. It was easy to count the votes.
против нет, воздержалось нет.
5 for, against none, abstained none. Thus, the decision awarding Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna the scientific degree of candidate of political sciences, scientific major 599, is accepted. Present, the head of the Decision Council, Galina Sergeyevna, member of the Decision Council, Niganov Sergey, Panzarev Konstantin, Kaminskaya Tatiana, Aleynikov Sergey Viktorovich, who was present in the remote access mode. Moldova. The applicant, Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna. The topic, the defense of the scientific degree for the awarding scientific degree of candidate of political sciences. And we decide to award Namiatova Kseniia Andreevna the scientific degree of candidate of political sciences, major 599, for the thesis Russians and Discourse on Modern Italy. 5 members of the Decision Council took part in the voting. 5 voted for, none against, none abstained. No, there is no need to voice the conclusion. So we can congratulate Kseniia Andreevna on the successful defense and wish her success in her future scientific work. Yes, and we give the floor to the applicant. I would like to thank all the members of the Decision Council. I thank my scientific advisor, Dmitry Petrovich, for assistance, and I'm very thankful to St. State University, where I experienced scientific growth. And I got into a marvelous academic environment where it's very pleasant to begin scientific work and to become the candidate of political sciences. I'm very thankful to you and to the university. Now we congratulate the applicant. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your participation. Now the live broadcast can be turned off. Thank you.